Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Virginia Congressman James Walkinshaw back with us. We'll chat with the congressman in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. But before we get to the congressman, I have something very special to announce. This is our 500th episode. 500. It's kind of crazy. And we received some special congratulations from our very first guest. Check this out.
Oh, Andy. Andy, my Andy. Candy Andy. 500 shows. This is a big deal. Not big enough that I actually spit out my gum to make a video. I want to congratulate you on 500 podcasts. My God. And I did the very first one. It's amazing how time flies. It seems like only 500 years ago that we did that, but it wasn't. But about 500 weeks ago, maybe more, give or take. I'm so proud of you for fighting the good fight, for doing such a great job as you always do. I'm honored that we are friends. I'm proud of everything that you've accomplished. And I can't wait to see what the next 500 podcasts that you do have in store for us. Congratulations, buddy. Well done.
Well, that was Paul Rudd, one of the nicest guys on the planet. So let me tell you about Congressman James Walkinshaw. He represents Virginia's 11th Congressional District. He serves on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee and its Military and Foreign Affairs Subcommittee, focusing on protecting the nonpartisan civil service, supporting fair pay for federal employees, and holding the administration accountable. He also serves on the House Homeland Security Committee and both its subcommittees on Homeland Border Security and Enforcement and Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection. Congressman, welcome back into the back room.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be here.
So I want to start off with Epstein. The House Oversight Committee, which you serve on, had subpoenaed former Attorney General Pam Bondi to testify in the hearings. After the DOJ initially said she would not testify, she now is scheduled to appear under oath before the committee on May 29th. So what changed?
What changed is, Democrats on the Oversight Committee, we kept the pressure on her and on Chairman Comer. We actually filed a resolution to begin the process to move toward contempt charges, civil contempt charges for her refusal to follow the law and comply with the subpoena. And as we were announcing the filing of those contempt charges, we got the word that she had agreed to appear. So, it's a testament to the value of keeping the pressure on and holding people's feet to the fire, holding them accountable. We made it very clear that nobody's above the law, right? Even the former Attorney General. So I'm glad that she'll be coming in. There are still some negotiations and conversations taking place around the parameters of her interview when she comes in, but she will be coming in.
Mm-hmm. And just for the folks who don't really understand what contempt charges mean, quickly walk us through, what would she have been facing?
So we filed a resolution to move towards civil contempt. So Congress has the 3 contempt tools: inherent contempt, criminal contempt, and civil contempt. Criminal contempt is what the Republicans tried to pursue with respect to Bill and Hillary Clinton. And criminal contempt would go to the Department of Justice, and they would make a decision as to whether to prosecute. Civil contempt, if Congress passes it, would go to the courts and could lead to, it has in the past led to, individuals facing fines. So, for example, someone who doesn't comply with a congressional subpoena, who is found in contempt of Congress, could be fined every day until they come into compliance. That's just one pathway that is possible. So that's the process that we were pursuing and prepared to pursue with respect to the former Attorney General. But I'm glad that she'll be coming in on the 29th.
Mm-hmm. And when she does come in, what are you hoping to get clear, factual answers on?
So here's what we know. We know the Department of Justice didn't follow the law. with respect to releasing the files. The law was very clear that all the files had to be released with a few categories of redactions allowed by a date certain. Not only did they not meet that date, they still haven't released all of the files. There are still, it seems, 3 million files that haven't been released. There have also been illegal redactions. So they over-redacted parts of the files in some cases to prevent, clearly, I think, to prevent Donald Trump from being embarrassed or worse. They also published some things that should have been redacted that identified some of the survivors of Epstein's crimes. So there were a series of failures all on her watch. She was Attorney General, so the buck stopped with her. She was responsible for those decisions. I want to know what conversations took place between her and Todd Blanche, between her and the White House about the decision to not fully release the files, to over-redact the files. I think those are key points. Who made the decision not to follow the law?
And as you know from her previous appearances before Congress, which were highly performative, albeit unsuccessful in the end, you know, when you're performing for an audience of one, you better make that audience happy. Apparently she did not. What makes you think she's going to be any different now? Are you hoping, or do you expect her to come in and just be honest? Even though she's under oath and has to be?
Yeah. I mean, look, in this kind of setting, it's more difficult to get away with the kind of histrionics we saw from her in her public hearings, right? She's going to be asked pointed, specific questions, not just by members of Congress, but by our trained attorneys and investigators. And if she is not truthful under oath, obviously she'll be in violation of the law. That's a very serious thing to lie to Congress. And she won't have the option to not answer questions. She will have to answer the questions that are posed to her. So I don't think the tactics she used during the hearings that took place are going to be successful in this setting.
I would bet that the DOJ would not be happy if she lied under oath. I mean, they indicted Comey over that, you know.
Yeah, and look at,
by the way, that was some New York sarcasm right there.
Yeah. In the hearings where she testified, in a hearing like that, every member of Congress has 5 minutes. And so if you're a witness like her who doesn't really want to have to answer hard questions, what you want to do is try to use up as much of that 5 minutes as possible with histrionics, with her, binder of opposition research on the members of Congress, because that's eating time. Mm-hmm. In this kind of setting, that doesn't work, because you're going to have to answer the questions that are posed. The time is essentially unlimited. So many of these interviews take hours and hours and hours, and she'll have to answer the questions that are posed. So filibustering doesn't really work in this setting.
And one could assume she's not going to be as defensive of Donald Trump as she was in the past, no longer having her job.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, sure.
Whether her loyalty to Trump has diminished.
You mentioned the 3 million files before. Acting AG Todd Blanche recently said that they released all the files, which is patently false. But do you really expect those files to ever be released? And what are you planning to do, continuing to do, to get them released?
Well, I think I do believe ultimately they will. And remember, there are two separate pathways here. One is the Epstein Files Transparency Act that passed Congress and President Trump signed, only because he knew that there was a veto-proof majority for it in both houses. But there's also the Oversight Committee's subpoena that is still in effect, and the Department of Justice, in my view, is not in compliance with. And in a future Congress, I can promise you, Democrats are in charge of the Oversight Committee. Not only will we reissue that subpoena, but I think you'll see us strengthening that subpoena and ensuring that there's real compliance with it. So we're going to get all of those files one way or the other. Whether it will happen in this Congress or not, I don't know, but it will ultimately happen. And, the acting attorney general has been talking out of both sides of his mouth with respect to the missing files, because he's the one who came out and said, we only released the 3 million files because the other 3 million-ish files were duplicative or not necessary to release. That's what he said first. Now he says there are no other files. So he said he made a subjective decision based on his opinion that those other 3 million files didn't need to be released because there wasn't really new information in them. The law doesn't give him the authority to make that decision. Law is very clear. The files got to be released.
Right.
So we're going to get them one way or the other. Ultimately, question will be, who will we have identified as having violated the law in preventing them from being released?
Last Sunday, 60 Minutes aired an interview with Trump where Norah O'Donnell read to him what the White House Correspondents' Dinner Shooter wrote in his manifesto. And a very indignant defense of Trump said, quote, "I am not a rapist. I didn't rape anybody. I am not a pedophile," which kind of took a lot of us back to Nixon's "I'm not a crook" and Bill Clinton's "I did not have sexual relations with that woman."
Right.
When you think of those charges, how is it possible that the Department of Justice, that Kash Patel at the FBI, have repeatedly said we have no basis to investigate further anybody, including and perhaps especially Donald Trump?
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. This is one of the things the survivors are so frustrated with. I think what our investigation on the Oversight Committee has revealed, among other things, is the weakness of the investigations that took place previously. Let's give a couple of examples. We know that the FBI never investigated Epstein's accountant, never interviewed Epstein's accountant, who was withdrawing large amounts of cash and putting them in a black bag for Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. FBI never even asked him questions. FBI never interviewed Epstein's lawyer, who wasn't really just a lawyer. He was an all-around fixer who, helped to get probably fraudulent visas and all kinds of other favors for Epstein. Never interviewed him. And similarly, somebody like Donald Trump, who, had a very long relationship with Epstein, including during the time period where we know Epstein was committing some of the worst of these crimes. By some accounts, was Epstein's best friend at the time that term was used. We know there's the strange birthday card, Trump lying and saying he was never on Epstein's jet, when we now know he took at least 8 flights on Epstein's jet. The lies about kicking Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, which we now know never really happened in that way. So a series of lies. Absolutely, Donald Trump should be answering questions about his relationship with Epstein. And, there are allegations against Trump in the files from women and girls. We don't have corroboration or solid evidence around those allegations. But look, we do know Donald Trump is someone who was found liable for sexual abuse, who's faced dozens of allegations, including many that are very credible. So at a minimum, he's somebody who should have to answer questions about what he knew, when he knew it, whether he was involved in any of the crimes that took place. I believe one day he will have to answer those questions under oath. I don't know that it'll be in this Congress, but I think at some point in the future he will.
And you mentioned Maxwell. There's speculation and talk of a pardon being given to her by Trump. How likely is that?
Anytime this comes up, I try to, and I ask my Republican colleagues, just put yourself in the shoes of one of the survivors who maybe was one who was abused, manipulated, threatened by Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell is a monster. I mean, she was the enforcer behind Epstein's entire sex trafficking, child sex trafficking ring. And the idea that there's even a conversation around pardoning her is a moral travesty. It is a disgusting, disgusting thing. And we heard recently from our own Republican chairman of the Oversight Committee, Chairman Comer, that some of his Republican members support a pardon for her. It's absolutely outrageous. And here's the thing, though. There's one man who could put an end to this entire conversation. Just say, no way, no how, we're not giving her a pardon. That man is Donald J. Trump. And the question is, why hasn't he said that? Why has he left this door open to pardoning her? And the only, I think, logical conclusion can come to, because there's no scenario under which she doesn't deserve the conviction and the sentence that she received. That no one's really even arguing that. The only rationale I can think of is that she either has some information that Donald Trump doesn't want the world to hear, or Donald Trump hopes she will do what she has done many times, including during her trials, and lie and, quote unquote, exonerate him. And he's leaving that pardon out there as leverage to cover his own ass. And, it's not a victimless thing, because those survivors who are out there now have to live every day with the possibility that this monster who abused them and helped to abuse them could be set free pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, I think you're 100% right. I think if folks just, stop and think about why someone who promised them accountability and prosecutions all of a sudden is doing the exact opposite, it's not too hard to figure out why. Let's switch to the midterms and redistricting. We just saw your state's Democratic redistricting measure approved by voters, but it's been challenged in court by Republicans, been invalidated, then upheld, and now it's resting with this Virginia Supreme Court. How do you expect this to ultimately be resolved?
I'm pretty confident that the Virginia Supreme Court will uphold the will of the voters. The voters expressed themselves very clearly a couple weeks ago. It would be really shocking for the Supreme Court after the fact to say to the voters, we're going to basically overrule you and interpose our judgment for yours. Republicans have made basically a series of technical arguments without getting into the details of them. I don't think they have a lot of credibility, but it's not 100%. So, we'll learn from the Virginia Supreme Court, I expect, hopefully next week, what the outcome is. But I think they will ultimately uphold the will that the voters expressed a couple weeks ago.
How does it impact you in District 11?
So my district will change pretty significantly. I'll lose about half of what I represent now in suburban Northern Virginia, and the district will extend west into the Shenandoah Valley.
And is that primarily red?
A lot of those areas are, yeah. There are some blue and some red areas, but only my district will become less blue than it is today. And that is one kind of interesting feature of this Virginia redistricting. And I'm someone who thinks nonpartisan redistricting is the right way to do it, but it would have to be both parties agreeing to do that. But the districts in Virginia, oddly, perhaps, will become more competitive. So districts that were deep, deep blue will be less blue. I think this year, November, will be a good one for Democrats. So I think we're on track and have the opportunity to win 10 of those seats this year in Virginia. But in future years that maybe aren't as favorable for Democrats, some of these seats, including mine, could be competitive.
I got so much to talk to you about, but we're running out of time. So I want to ask you quickly your thoughts on where we're at with Iran and also Pete Hegseth's testimony this week.
So with Iran, the irony is, in terms of the negotiations, the United States of America is in a weaker position today than we were before Donald Trump launched this war of choice in Iran. And they're negotiating around precisely the same things. Before the war, Trump administration was negotiating with the regime in Iran around a 5-year suspension of their nuclear program or a 20-year suspension of their nuclear program. Same conversations are taking place now, or will take place whenever folks get back to Pakistan to have them. The difference is today the Strait of Hormuz is closed and gas prices have skyrocketed. Home interest rates are up. Diesel and fertilizer costs for American farmers are up. So we're in a weaker negotiating position vis-a-vis the regime in Iran, which is a harder line regime today than it was before the war. So we've spent tens of billions of dollars. Secretary Hegseth hasn't given an honest answer as what that number is. We've lost 13 brave U.S. service members. We've weakened our strategic position across the globe because we've exhausted our supply of key munitions, and we're not in a stronger negotiating place. It is probably the biggest foreign policy blunder since the war in Iraq that Donald Trump opposed and said he would never reprise another stupid foreign war in the Middle East. So it's been a complete unmitigated disaster. Mm-hmm. And Iran still has their nuclear material, by the way, and are not giving up their nuclear, they're just not going to give up on the possibility of having a nuclear weapon in the future under these circumstances.
Mm-hmm. And Hegseth, what did you make of his performance this week?
Yeah, look, Hegseth is a skilled Fox News communicator, and we talked about Pam Bondi with an audience of one. Hegseth has an audience of one.
He pulled a full Bondi yesterday, and
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and Donald Trump likes that. I think Donald Trump likes to watch that. But we also know that, when somebody becomes a liability, Trump cuts them loose. At least he's done that with women in the cabinet so far. Doing it to a man in the cabinet would be a first in this term. I think Hegseth is increasingly a liability. Trump thought this war in Iran was going to be easy and simple, that the regime would collapse the way that Maduro was easily deposed in Venezuela. That hasn't happened. He's getting frustrated. He's looking for an off-ramp, but he's stuck in a cul-de-sac. And at the end of the day, someone's got to take the fall for that. My money would be on Pete Hegseth, but we'll see.
And with regard to Hegseth's claim that the ceasefire pauses the war powers deadline, which just came due, A, he's wrong, right? But B, don't they now have to request authorization? I mean, what happens now? Does he just get to write it off and that's it? We're all just like, okay, it's paused.
One of the things I learned from the late Jerry Connolly, who I used to work for, is you can have a huge advantage in Washington if you actually read the law, because most people don't. And it's clear that Pete Hegseth hasn't. The War Powers Act is crystal clear. There's no pause in the countdown for a ceasefire or a cessation of hostilities. The 60-day clock starts when hostilities begin. If there's no congressional authorization in 60 days, then you have 30 days, and it's not a 30-day extension. It's 30 days to safely withdraw the troops who are engaged in that conflict. Mm-hmm. There is no provision, no language to stop the clock for a temporary ceasefire. That's just not the law. And Secretary Hegseth should know that. Speaker Johnson definitely should know that, but it seems that he doesn't, because he's repeated this talking point about the clock stopping. It's just not true, and it's not the law.
But it will be enforced.
Congress's ability to enforce the War Powers Act really comes down to funding, right? And if we're not serious about cutting off funding for an armed conflict or a war that any president engages in, then we will never claw back our constitutional authority to declare war. And I've been very clear on record. I'm not going to vote for funding for this war. That wasn't authorized by Congress, and I think is doing incredible damage to the American economy and the American people. But that's our tool and our mechanism, really, to enforce the War Powers Act and our constitutional prerogatives. And I have a lot of folks I serve with on the Republican side who seem dead set on diminishing the power of the very body in which they serve. Mm-hmm. And they're doing it again.
Yeah.
They're doing it again.
Yeah. Congressman, I appreciate your time. Come back again.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.
Take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.